The transport vibrated with a low, bone-deep thrum that had ceased to be a sound and had become a state of being. For 3 days, it had been the only constant in the cramped, lightless hold, a physical reminder of the inexorable vector carrying him away from everything he had known, and toward a future he had no hand in shaping. The air was a rancid cocktail of unwashed bodies, lubricant, and the metallic tang of recycled oxygen. So Vic Kael could taste the despair of the 50 other souls pressed in around him. He sat with his back against the cold, sweating metal of the bulkhead, knees drawn to his chest, a ghost in a steel coffin. He had chosen this. That was the lie he kept telling himself. A choice between the slow, grinding death of a penal asteroid and the swift, violent death of a recycled grunt was no choice at all. It was merely a preference for the method of one's own erasure. His mind, a well-oiled machine of tactical analysis and self-recrimination, replayed the moment in the enforcer's office. The sterile white walls, the faint scent of ozone from the air purifier, the officer's placid, untroubled face as he'd laid out the options. Recycling, the hegemony's euphemism for reclamation. You weren't a person anymore. You were a resource to be reprocessed, a faulty component to be repurposed until you broke for good. He had been an officer. He had stood on the bridge of a destroyer, the quiet hum of its fusion core, a symphony of power beneath his feet, and he had given orders that sent men to their deaths for the glory of the hegemony. Now, he was less than the lowest rating on that ship, a piece of meat with a serial number, packed into a gravity-pressurized crate and shipped to the ass end of the solar system. The irony was a blade twisting in his gut. A sudden, violent lurch threw him against his neighbor, a wiry man with the vacant, haunted eyes of a re-educated dissident. A grunt, a curse, and they separated, the brief, unwelcome intimacy dissolving back into stony silence. The thrumming changed pitch, a high-frequency whine, layering over the bass rumble. Deceleration. A series of percussive clangs echoed through the hull magnetic clamps, engaging. Arrival. A collective, nervous stir rippled through the cargo hold. Breaths were held, fists clenched. For 3 days, the darkness had been a strange sort of shelter, a place where you could be anonymous, unseen. Now, the lights were coming on. They flickered first, strobing painfully against sleep-deprived retinas, before settling into a harsh, antiseptic glare. Kael squinted, the world resolving into a grid of pale, grim-faced men and women blinking in the sudden illumination. The hegemony had stripped them of their possessions, but not their history. He could read their stories in the ink that stained their skin, the scars that mapped their faces, the defiant set of their jaws. Debtors, black marketeers, political undesirables, and failures like him, the uncycle, scraped from the bottom of society's barrel. A klaxon blared, sharp and startling, followed by the hiss of depressurizing seals. The main hatch eye-rised open, not to the familiar blue-white of an orbital station, but to a vast, cavernous hangar carved from gray rock. The air that washed in was shockingly cold, sterile, and carried the faint, acrid smell of propellant and ionized dust. Armed guards in matte black pressure armor stood waiting, their helmets obscuring any hint of humanity, their pulse rifles held at a low, casual ready. They were statues of lethal intent. "On your feet, scum," the voice, amplified and distorted by a helmet speaker, cracked like a whip. "Move. Move. Move." The 50 recycled scrambled to obey, a clumsy, stumbling mass of humanity funneled out of the transport and onto the hangar deck. The gravity was noticeably lighter here, a strange, buoyant feeling that made his movements feel clumsy and exaggerated. Ganymede. He looked up, past the network of pipes and conduits crisscrossing the hangar ceiling and through a massive, reinforced viewport. There, dominating the blackness of space, was Jupiter. It wasn't the distant, jewel-like point of light seen from Earth. It was a god. A monstrous, swirling ball of ochre, cream, and blood red. Its great red spot, a malevolent, unblinking eye staring down at them. It filled the sky, oppressive and absolute, a constant, silent testament to their own insignificance. The pressure of 1,000 atmospheres was nothing compared to the weight of that silent, planetary judgment. The guards herded them with shoves and curses through a series of blast doors, each one closing behind them with the finality of a tomb ceiling. The architecture was pure hegemony brutalism, raw, unfinished rockcrete, exposed structural beams, and harsh, functional lighting that cast long, distorted shadows. There was no art, no color, no comfort. Every angle was sharp. Every surface was cold. This place was not designed for living. It was designed for processing. A machine for breaking down individuals and reassembling them into soldiers. They were marched into a long tiled chamber filled with steam and the sharp, chemical scent of industrial disinfectant. More guards, these ones unhelmeted, their faces bored and contemptuous, directed the process with curt gestures. Strip everything on the floor. There was no room for modesty or defiance. Clothes, a lifetime of accumulated fabric, were shed and piled into heaps. Naked and shivering under the cold lights and colder gazes, they were herded toward a series of archways. Kael walked forward, his eyes scanning, assessing. The floor was textured for grip, but slick with condensation. The nozzles for the sonic cleanser were aimed high for maximum dispersal, minimum efficiency. The water reclamation grates were clogged with hair and grime. This wasn't military precision. It was industrial expediency. They were cattle being washed before the slaughter. He stepped under the archway. The sonic blast hit him like a physical blow, a high-frequency wave that vibrated through his bones, shaking loose the grime of the transport and the last vestiges of his former life. It was invasive, scouring, leaving his skin tingling and raw. Hot, recycled water mixed with a stinging antiseptic followed, sluicing away the dirt. The process was over in 30 seconds. He emerged on the other side, dripping and cold, to be met by a medical drone that scanned him with a beam of cold blue light. A new serial number 734, Kaelen Voss, flashed on a screen before being stamped onto a metallic bracelet that was clamped, painfully tight, around his wrist, the final act of ownership. He was no longer Kaelen Voss, dishonored officer and failed salvager. He was a number, an asset. Next came the quartermaster's station, a long counter behind which a sour-faced NCO presided over piles of gray fatigues and black boots. He didn't look at their faces, only at the datapad that displayed their sizes. Name: Voss Kaelen. Kael's voice was a low rasp. The NCO grunted, his finger tracing down the screen. He shoved a bundle of rough, synthetic fabric and a pair of mag boots across the counter. Next, Kael took the bundle. The fabric was coarse and smelled of chemical sealant. It was a single, seamless jumpsuit, the kind issued to penal workers and cannon fodder. It was a uniform designed to be cheap to produce and easy to hose down. He remembered his officer's tunic, the heavy, dark blue wool, the crisp lines of the tailoring, the subtle weight of the rank insignia on his collar. He had worn that uniform with a pride that now felt like a sickness in his throat. It had been a symbol of his place in the Hegemony's grand design, a testament to his belief in the system. This gray skin they had given him was also a symbol of his new place. He was refuse. He was a component in a war machine, and the machine didn't care about the comfort or dignity of its parts. Dressed in the anonymous gray of the recycled, he and the others were led to their new home, Barracks Block Gamma. It was a single cavernous room, 200 bunks, stacked 3 high, in relentlessly straight lines. There was no privacy, no personal space. The air hummed with the monotonous drone of the life support system, a constant, oppressive sound that seemed to absorb all others. Men and women were segregated by floor markings that no one seemed inclined to respect. The faces around him were a study in controlled desperation. Some were young, barely out of their teens, their fear a raw, open wound. Others were older, their features hardened into masks of cynical resignation. They were all ghosts, haunted by the lives they'd lost. Kael found an empty bunk on the top tier, threw his gear onto the thin, stained mattress, and sat down, the cheap mag soles of his new boots clicking against the metal frame. From here, he could see most of the room. He could see the alliances already beginning to form, the gangers from the lower arcologies gravitating toward each other, their shared ink and slang a shield against the alien environment. He saw the white-collar criminals, the embezzlers and data thieves, huddled together, looking lost and soft. And he saw the loners, like himself, who found positions on the periphery, watching, waiting, trusting no one. A high-pitched whistle cut through the low murmur of the barracks. Every head snapped toward the entrance. A man stood there, silhouetted against the corridor light. He was built like a reinforced bulkhead, his jaw a solid block of granite, and his eyes small, hard chips of obsidian. He wore the immaculate uniform of a gunnery sergeant, the red sash of a combat veteran stark against the gray. The silence in the room became absolute, heavy, and fearful. The sergeant strode into the center of the room, his mag boots slamming against the deck with each step, the sound like a hammer striking an anvil. He surveyed them all, his gaze sweeping across their faces with undisguised contempt. "Welcome to Ganymede," he began, his voice a low, gravelly roar that needed no amplification. "For those of you who still cling to the pathetic notion that you have rights, let me disabuse you of that fantasy. You have no rights. You have no name beyond the number on your wrist. You are not citizens. You are not even recruits. You are material. You are ammunition. You are the property of the terrene hegemony, reclaimed to pay the debt you owe society." He paused, letting the words sink in, letting them poison the air. "My name is Sergeant Gunnery, Sergeant Kost. Here, I am your God. My word is law. Your thoughts are irrelevant. Your feelings are a liability. Your past is erased. Out there," he jabbed a thumb toward the viewport and the terrifying beauty of Jupiter, "is a war. We are fighting a relentless, non-human enemy, the xenomorphids. They do not reason. They do not negotiate. They exist only to consume. And the hegemony, in its infinite generosity, has given you worms a chance to be useful for the first time in your miserable lives. You will be the wall against the tide. You will be the sand in the gears of their advance. You will be the flesh that blunts their claws." Kaelen felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. He had heard speeches like this before, in the academy, delivered with patriotic fervor and soaring rhetoric about honor and sacrifice. This was different. This was the skin peeled back. The raw, ugly truth laid bare. There was no promise of glory here, only a guarantee of utility. "You will train until you break," Kost continued, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. "And when you break, we will rebuild you. We will strip away your weakness, your sentimentality, your individuality. We will forge you into weapons. Some of you will not survive this training. I consider that a successful weeding out of defective equipment. Those of you who do survive will be shipped to the front. Most of you will die there, in the cold and the dark, forgotten and unmourned. But your deaths will buy time. Your deaths will fuel the machine that protects the real citizens, the worthy ones, living safe and sound back on Earth and Mars. Your lives were a waste. Your deaths will have meaning." He let that final, brutal sentence hang in the air. It was the core of their new catechism, the central truth of their existence. Your deaths will have meaning. The ultimate hegemony propaganda, repurposed for the condemned. It wasn't about living for the cause. It was about the efficiency of their dying. First lesson starts now. Kost barked outside. Formation. 5 minutes. He turned and strode out, his footsteps echoing in the stunned silence he left behind. For a moment, nobody moved. The spell was broken by one of the gangers, who spat on the floor. Frack that. A low murmur of agreement rippled through the ranks, but it was a firefly in a hurricane. The fear was stronger. Slowly, then with increasing urgency, the recycleds began to move, pulling on their boots. A clumsy scramble toward the exit. Kael swung his legs over the side of the bunk and dropped to the floor. His movements economical and precise. He ignored the jostling bodies around him, his focus narrowed. He had been through this before. He knew the rhythms of military indoctrination, the blend of psychological abuse and physical exhaustion designed to shatter and remold. But Kost was right. This was different. Before, there had been a promise at the end of it of rank, of respect, of a future. Now, the only promise was a meaningful death. A shiver, unrelated to the cold, traced its way down his spine. He was back in the machine. But this time, he wasn't the operator. He was just another cog, waiting to be ground to dust. Some wars, he thought with a sudden chilling clarity as he stepped out into the cold Ganymede twilight, under the unblinking eye of Jupiter, are fought to be lost. And he was now on the losing side.